Johnson. I'm the manager for the Utah Center for the Book. I'm excited to share with you the reading and discussion from our previous manager for the Center for the Book, the wonderful Willy Palomo. His book, Wake the Others, is right here. You can find that anywhere you buy books, hopefully a bookshop or independent bookstores. Thank you so much for the Under the Umbrella for hosting, and to our major donors for Utah Humanities. I hope you enjoy.
Really beautiful mixed crowd right now of folks and poets I've known for like years and years and years. Family, including my nephews who are in the crowd. Folks that my mama knows who are like, oh, there's a book on your life, we gotta go check that out. So it's really beautiful to see y'all here right now. I got some introductory stuff that we gotta do, like give a shout out to Utah Humanities, who has funded this event. They paid for me to be out here. So good shout out to them and the work that they do throughout the state. They are doing a month-long literary festival right now. So they are everywhere from St. George to Logan to Salt Lake City, just doing events on books, which are important to promote so that we keep like our democracy functioning and also just keep a nice, literate, like educated populace. We also have Drake here, who is making this event accessible for folks who are hard of hearing and no ASL, so give it up for Drake. This is gigantic. I am passionate about it. If it was up to me, every school would be like dual language where you also learn ASL. And to go on a nerdy little side rant, throughout North America and Mesoamerica, prior to colonization, there was a very widespread hand talk that was just a sign language that indigenous folks had. Of course, it got particular to every single region, but it was communicable across regions and was usually what they used to be able to communicate across languages when they didn't have it. And for a lot of indigenous communities in the Americas, being deaf didn't necessarily make you like disabled. Like you could still be a leader in the community because of hand talk. And that's just a huge like legacy that is a bit forgotten in the Americas right now. So big up on this ASL. I'm huge about having that here. And yeah, I guess other than that, other folks to shout out, Glass Spider Publishing, an independent publisher out in Ogden, Utah. Without them, this book would have been impossible. Editorial Calina, which is a transnational Salvadoran press. Without them, this book would have been impossible. As well as Jose Andres Mos and Alejandro Garzon, who are the translators of the book into Spanish. So I translated the book into Spanish myself, and I showed it to Editorial Calina, like, look at what I did. I translated it myself. And then they giggled at me and were like, we're gonna get somebody to like brush up the Spanish. And I'm super grateful for Mos and Alejandro for doing that. And tomorrow at the Jordan River Nature Center at 12 p.m., we'll be doing an all Spanish version of this reading as well. And I think those are the folks I need to shout out, other than Under the Umbrella Bookstore, who opened up special for this event today, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But real quick, before we get started into poems, I'm gonna do like a longer sort of land acknowledgement. So up north in Utah, the indigenous groups that have historically belonged to this region, the Shoshone, the Ute, the Goshu, we wanna acknowledge them as being the shepherds and stewards of this land for time immemorial. Especially as you head down south, you see the Paiute and the Dene, and we want to acknowledge them as being a part of this cultural landscape as well. And for most land acknowledgements, there's that, and then it's kind of over. Part of what I want to do is talk a little bit about the history of how some land acknowledgements function. And what would happen is indigenous groups, as they crossed over and passed over one another, they would share their oral history with each other, sometimes for days, just to be like, here's every single interaction that we've had, just to make sure that we can be on the same page right now. And if we were to do that about Utah right now, it would be talking about the history that the indigenous folks had with each other prior to like Brigham Young coming over here. It would talk about the history of Brigham Young and the conversion of Washakie and a part of the Shoshone to Mormonism, as another group of the Shoshone decided to leave and go off to reservations. It would be talk about the disruption of waterways, and like right now, if you're a Utah, you know that the Great Salt Lake is in peril in large part because of the disruption that is colonization to the waterways of Utah. We have to talk about things like the Bear River Massacre, which Darren Perry has been doing an amazing job of opening these conversations across the state from a Shoshone Mormon perspective. We'd have to talk about the boarding schools which existed in Panguitch, the slavery that like the church sometimes participated in. For Mesoamericans, everybody from like Mexicans to Salvadorans, we'd be talking about a Uto-Aztecan language family, which is a language family that is shared from the Shoshone up north here, all the way down to Nahuatl in El Salvador. So like, there's the same language family and a shared history that my peoples in El Salvador have in a relationship with the folks here up north. For Chicanos, there would be a conversation about Lago Tehuayo, which is what they called the Great Salt Lake, which the Shoshone call Piapa. We'd have to talk about voting disenfranchisement as it's happening to Latino communities in Utah, to Native communities down in San Juan County. And we'd have to get in the same page about that. We don't have time for that, but I want to just give knowledge, like acknowledge that in a more in-depth way, especially because my book owes a lot to the indigenous traditions that exist throughout Mesoamerica. The whole book is framed around the myth of the goddess Cipactli, who is this frog alligator sort of creature, depending like which version of the story you're listening to. And a real quick rendition of the story is that there is this like monster goddess frog alligator creature, and then there's the four main gods of the Aztec pantheon. So like Huitzilipotli, Quetzalcoatl are included in there, and they're trying to create the world. And every single time they create it, Cipactli, because she's hungry, she has a mouth on every single one of the joints in her body, goes and eats it. So they get frustrated with this eventually, and they decide to tear her apart limb from limb, and then to make the world out of her. And that is the myth of Cipactli. So when I learned this story when I was in undergrad, I was drawn to it for a couple of reasons. One is because it acknowledged like the creation story of the earth to be a violent thing, as a thing that like, oh, we owe the earth for. Two was because it also acknowledged the earth to be a living being. So like when you listen to the story, they talk about it in ways like all the caves and all are her eyes and her mouths, and all the rivers are her like tears, and all the hairs are her like the grasses and things like that. So it's a way of looking at the world as like, oh, the literal body parts of this goddess figure. And for me, a huge part of the reason I was drawn to it was because it was one of the few stories I could find out there that I felt like could encapsulate what my mother and the woman in her family and our whole family went through during the Salvadoran Civil War. Part of what I need to be grateful for right now is one, that this event is even still happening. Because right now, Under the Umbrella and a bunch of different organizations are participating in a global strike for a ceasefire in Palestine. A huge part of what I need to acknowledge right now is just that, like, as much as this event has nothing to do with that, it is also deeply mired into history in the sense that, like, hey, we're going to be talking about warfare and the consequences of war. This also functions as a trigger warning. I have my own nephews here, so I'm going to, like, clean things up as need be, but, like, we have to talk about war in order to talk about the experience. Another huge part is talking about, like, U.S. citizens' roles in these conflicts, right? The Civil War in El Salvador and Central America does not happen without U.S. taxpayers and U.S. intervention. The war that is happening right now and the rockets that are being fired are U.S. weaponry, and those are things that we need to acknowledge. Of course, this is a time where we as like people who live here have time to educate ourselves and have time to look into the history, and I deeply recommend that right now. It would show you like, hey, here's how the British were involved in this conflict and how they started the partition between Palestine and Israel and promised land to the Zionists that was Palestine without consulting any Palestinian. They would talk about the Nakba, where 700,000 Palestinians were removed from their homelands in 1948. and generally the experience of being a colonized people. A huge part of why we don't know a lot of these histories already is because books are banned, and beyond that aren't included in our curriculum to begin with. A huge part of the history of El Salvador that I had to study and figure out in order to even write this book, but beyond the book, just to understand who I was, like how I end up here, like in Utah as a Salvadoran, was research I had to do that the school systems weren't willing to offer me. I found lovely professors sometimes that could point me in directions, but it's not like they were teaching courses on this to begin with. Even when you're investing thousands of dollars searching for an education that can provide this to you. And being at Under the Umbrella, which is one of the front lines here in Utah for defending our literature, especially when it comes to queer books. And I'm really grateful for Caitlin for willing to be open right now. So that's just the bit that I wanted to say for this. The money that comes from my cut of this for today, because we're staying open during a global strike, we'll figure out how to get to the Palestinian people. Ideally through humanitarian aid, but it's getting complicated because humanitarian aid isn't getting into Palestine right now, just because of the amount of warfare that's going on. But we're gonna figure that out. But now I'm gonna move into poems. And the way this will look is I'm gonna read some poems from the book, talking about my mom's experiences. On occasion, I'll invite a writer from Plumas Colectiva to come up. Plumas Colectiva, where you at? Where you at? They are a lovely artist collective that we founded in my mama's basement of me and a whole bunch of other Latina creators, visual artists, and writers who have just gotten together as a community to help create space for BIPOC voices. So they're gonna be supporting me throughout the evening so I can get some time to like breathe and get the jitters out, and also just show how our experiences are connected. So I'm gonna get a drink of water and then start reading your poems. So another person that deserves a shout out is this woman named Shemi Tapepechul, who comes to us from Washington, D.C. So this book not only has Spanish in it, it also has Nahuatl. And Shemi is a person who has a connection with all the indigenous elders in El Salvador in order to make this translation of Nahuatl possible in the book. So the first poem in the book is called In the Name of Zipacti, which is the Aztec goddess I was telling y'all about, but through Salvadoran Nahuatl. And this is kind of an overarching history of El Salvador. Before hunger, before hambre, she was the only word for the bull, for the belly impaled by his hoof and huff, for the emptiness that makes you weaker than before, for the desperation that makes you stronger than before. She had more mouths than a family in famine. Before you call us poor, before you call us hungry, call us children of Zipacti, the ugly goddess deformed by hunger, the wicked destroyer wreaking havoc on everything built by the gods, who rather gouge our eyes and show us justice, who rather slice our ears and hear our cries. This is not a country, it is a mass grave. We are here to sow fields from the scattered teeth of our mothers' smiles, to reap their mangled scalps, mumbling dirt in ancient tongues. And look at my people, pissed off, pissing on monuments, breaking into your countries, my riot, from the bolo who threw the first bottle in Mount Pleasant to the indios who lost their lives in Izalco, before Christians named you El Salvador, before Tlaxcaltecans named you Cuscatlan, before our goddess Cuscatlan, it was you, Zipacti. Your hair the gods tore from the scalp and braided into trees. Your monte climbing the montañas of your breast. Your shoulders the boulders gods heaved from your chest. Your legs the red horizons the gods split apart and called kingdom. It is your womb they claim as nation. It is you we find every day. your butchered feet sticking out of black bags, your tattooed hands resurrecting from rivers, an endless stream of ants born. I do not know of any other gods who know what we've been through. Mi matria, my mother. And sorry, General Martinez, but we didn't all die in 1932. Our blood spilt, and sis Mama was once a Maya Nawa de mi diosa, one of the many hijas tortercas de Zipaquital de Guyu. You can tell by the way the earth blossoms to greet her. You can tell by the way men have torn her apart. Oh, Mama, we may have lost our tongues. They may have cut a country from your calf and forced you to run. We have forgotten our old names. We have nothing to claim as ours. But Mama, in my dreams, I tie us back together. Lonely child with his jigsaw of a mother. I feed you mangoes for eyes, and you weep sticky down stitches. Pair of lacerated legs wiggle from waist and run headless as chickens into the bewildered streets. I want to reverse the past. I want to doctor the continents, Pangea your panza. I search for your disappeared bones wherever I can find them. In the mouth of a cave, hissing with bats and fleas, a skull smiling high as cacti pines in a desert. Our dynasty knows no unbroken mirrors. I see my reflection in a river and find faceless fish. Swim with me to somewhere fishermen can't find us, where we are no longer distracted by their bobbing worms, where I no longer believe I am the answer to the question at the end of their hugs. So with that, we invited a goddess into a space. And I'm going to invite a second goddess. Frances over there is a bird person primarily, also a poet person primarily, and I'm going to invite her to do a poem for us real quick. Give it up for Frances.
I like your nails. Oh, thank you.
I like your hair.
Oh, okay, thank you, love. All right, so this poem is called Press Release on Downhouse Plexus. Press release on Downhouse Plexibus. On the 21st of July, 2022, the monarch butterfly was listed as endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Downhouse Plexibus, an insect whose range spans 4,000 kilometers of the North American continent, Mexico, Aslan. Now, what makes a species qualify for the endangered listing? Is it only when it's almost too late already, wings gasping and feeble? Do you know how fraught it is to get a creature listed? Oil magnates, politicians, land developers will fight, silver-toothed snarling, to block a species from being protected. But what's new about colonizers refusing to acknowledge the steady, linear decimation of monarch butterflies, Arizona jaguars, the night blooming Sirius? What's new about the refusal to say anything has been wrong for centuries? Or they'll say, you simply don't belong here anyways. Now, how long does it take a family to migrate? 2 generations of movement, metamorphosis for my family to understand one corner of the world, hear promises about another. All the knowledge ancestral we are given and meant to have, meant to know, and it is a fight, inside and out, a battle every day to recall the word for mariposa, to pull forth from silk strand memory the stories of how our mother's wings once flourished, swept aside earth and resisted the slow spread of golf course lawns over supposed vacant lots filled with flowering milkweed, young, tender caterpillars just waiting to grow into their words. Mariposas, mariposas, no matter when the white people decide to tell you this, we have always been in danger. But remember, mariposa, we are meant to inherit all the stories that make our names honeydew on our curled tongues, legacy of myth, migration. It is the relearning of patterns, the reintroduction of ourselves. It is the claiming of each new wing beat in the company of thousands we were always meant to find. Porque para nosotros, resistir es sobrevivir.
Give it up for Francis. This next poem's a prayer to my abuelo, so my papa from my maternal side, which I wrote mostly to try to understand like the conflict. And this is the moment where guerrillas decide to take the home that my family was living in El Salvador. When the revolution finally comes, abuelo, the morning hides like an infantry behind the hills. Crickets gnaw a hymn around you. Your children sleep through the bony night, cow-like on bellies. They know the way the sun runs its wet hands around the neck. Imilpa bites the skin before nursing you, but you still name them children. They still wrap and mold one another for comfort from ghosts and dreams. When he finds you, compañero, pistolita en su cintura y cigarrillo en su boca, you are too old to fight, so instead, he asks for your children. And remembering your mother, you say, no, somos cristianos, we stay uninvolved. And your neck bends like a palm tree in the wind as he pulls you by the collar so close, you see saliva stretch crooked on his teeth as he whispers, leave. If you don't fight with us, hermano, then leave. Because we won't protect you when they come to abuse your daughters and burn your house down with your sons trapped inside its doors. Behind you, my mother stands thin and shy as moonlight. 15 years of girlhood awoken by the uproar, her eyes clouded as blood and water. You look at my mother, the home she has never left and always known, and you tell her, wake the others. We need to go. If the time ever comes again, abuelo, to abandon all else for what we cannot leave behind, I pray for fire, for everything to burn, for enough smoke to smother the sight of what I once loved and deserted, if I am ever fool enough to look back. So one of the other amazing women in my family is my tia Tere, who I've had the joy of being able to live with for a couple of months. They were under darker circumstances because it was when my cousin was incarcerated. So she moved in with 2 grandchildren, and then I became like a dad overnight for like 6 months and started taking care of them, their children. But this is a poem about her, and it's called El Hombre Machete. Tia Tere told me his real name was Daniel. Ojos como las boquitas mojadas de botellas cristales. Face, a chilled pilsner with a cracked side. Daniel, una mano amputada a mitad de una oración callado en su puño. Daniel, a bloody foot running nowhere by itself. Daniel, who split Usulután into myriad directions with a slash of his machete. Arm, leg, arm, head, broken votive statues to a thirsty god, whose horse hooves echo the gut spill smack of his blade, who left police with slippery limbs to gather and no liquor to bury them. Daniel, better known by the locals as El Hombre Machete. What else do you call someone who hacks apart men, women, and children for the nickel and dime of their pockets? Cabeza por cerveza and vice versa. Everyone knows to run away from a mofo with a name that ugly. Everyone except for Tia, of course. Don't be a hero, niña estúpida, cries abuelita, and of course with all the other rational people. Nah. While mama sees their children and grown men ran and left their huevos at their table, Niña Tera held her messes. down. Just a teenage campesina y cocinera, a female David against a mini Salvadoreño Goliath, and she wasn't about to let some crazy machete-wielding psycho killer chop her family into chicharrones. Do you know who I am? He asked her, his eyes squinting like a blade, and of course my tia gave him a side eye twice as sharp and said, I don't care, cause she ain't moved, not even as he declared soy a diablo and pulls out the gory machete, face twisted with satanic laughter. Nah, Niña Tere laughed along, cause she'd been already seen the devil and he ain't him. So he swings his machete a warning strike at the table and gets it stuck. My tia didn't hesitate. Behind her back, she pulls a seething red poker from the fire and stabs him in the throat. Said he shrieked like a butchered sow as he fled, leaving behind his machete, staggering back to his horse, never to be heard from again. My tia tells me all this as I help her prepare hojas de guineo for Christmas tamales. My punishment for snapping the limbs off my sister's Barbie doll's hand, a heavy slap across my face as she sits, humming softly to hymnos with legs not even her diabetes could take away from her. I ask her if she's a murderer. And smiling, a crooked viejita smile, she tells me she would do it again to any man who acts like he owns this world. That's my tia. And in the spirit of badass woman, I'm gonna welcome Melissa Salguero up to the stage. Like that, and we'll move this out of the way, like that. And I will creep this way, like this.
It's my favorite poem/story. So in the spirit of that, and also there's children here, this poem has one swear that will happen at the end of it. This is your warning. People chew on words like dogs, work at them until their teeth crack, until whatever they bite bows down, grinds into nothing but a hot and sticky exhale the one-sided name, until it becomes raw, hides in the back of the throat. I say, spit it out, and yes, I am crying here. Reaching out a hand towards a gnashing thing that is all snap and smile and backwards tongue, and I offer a taste of my blood. The boy looks at me and swallows, furrows his brow and hesitates. See, I am asking a boy that does not know me to open up, to unhinge his jaw and place the bones from everybody he took from and lay it at my feet. I demand all of the words that never escaped past the porcelain border lining his gums. All of the raw and ripped up remains of a live thing turned leather, suffocating and still dripping a mangled heartbeat off his tongue. He likes the taste of blood, I think. Likes the way that he can bare his teeth, make everyone else think themselves a skeleton, a meal stuffed between his mercy. Likes how all his howling echoes off the concrete in agreement. I expect that the bark will not be worse than the bite if I ask for it. So I ask for it. I ask him to give again, and he calls me a bitch. And it falls onto the floor between us. So I make him look at it. See all the fear in his eyes when he too remembers that he is just a body between someone else's mouth, how easily teeth can sink into both our skins, and he remembers he too is a bleeding thing. So he apologizes, places himself in the palm of my hand, and I call him a good boy. See, who else but a bitch can teach a mad dog how to heal? That's my friend!
This next poem's called Witness, and it's from the perspective of my mom's. Papi punched holes on the tops of barrels so we could breathe, but none to see. So I can't say I saw the battalion. I can't say I saw the men, or were they boys, tear a white flag from Papi's shirt and stomp on his chest as if putting out the fire. There was no fire. Just Papi, grunting and swearing there was no one left in our shack. No sons to make soldiers, no daughters to make single mothers. This is how Papi protected us. He made us wear his jeans instead of faldas, so if soldiers found us, we'd be harder to break. He beat us when we spoke back or said achif. He taught us to cook sopitas y arroces y tamalitos so one day we could be good wives. The world is unjust to unmarried women, he said. And thus, we learned to suffer. Good daughters, we listened, always, even when the soldiers revved their cackling engines to run over again. Even when our men lied on us again and again, Papi should have died that day. It took one man to stand between him and the soldiers. It took one man to yell stop and defend his good name in English. Witness is a translation of martyr. In Spanish, testificar comes from wagering your flesh on the truth. Power forgets some of us survived to tell the story. The man lived. The soldiers fled. Papi lived, and slowly we massaged his ribs back into place. For weeks we put warm milk on his tongue. The swelling stopped. He relearned how to walk. Some of his hijas are still hiding in barriles de frijol. Others are mastering the art of walking away. So, during the war, the LDS Church was still sending missionaries out there. My mom got converted to the church when she was about 17 in San Salvador. And the church is, of course, this big, complicated history. But one of the beautiful things that it has done is be able to provide a way to be able to hold these stories. If you ask most of my tias and tios about these stories, they can't really share them without having PTSD symptoms, essentially. And while sharing these stories is never easy, one of the things I am extremely grateful about for the church is giving my mother a language where these stories can exist and can be shaped into a larger narrative of God's plan. So this poem is called Canción de Cuna. It was the first poem from this book that was ever published, and it was chosen by Martín Espada when I was over at Westminster. So that was kind of a big deal for me. This is this poem, which is essentially the title in English. Unos inditos somos, hijos de Cuscatlán. Mama used to sing me this lullaby whenever I cried as a baby. I have never heard it elsewhere, and sometimes you can no longer remember the words. But when I can't sleep at night, I mumble her melody until I'm out. Mama wasn't necessarily good at singing. Her voice breaks sharp on almost every note, wavering bold and uncertain, full of a soft vulnerability lost inside her mouth. For years, I watched her hum hymnos at sacrament meetings, her eyes darting over the text, stuttering, struggling to read and sing at the same time. It always felt like the pianist was the one interrupting her. The piano didn't know what a prayer should sound like. Mama holds La Biblia the way you hold a song in your chest, mouthing words like hijo and Dios. She sounds them out, but she knows what they mean. Those words quake from inside her, a red-eyed truth, a cherry-wet wound. I hear it when she prays at night, especially when it's for me. Up next, I'm going to invite Lynn. Yeah, Lynn. Give it up for Lynn, a fellow Pluma, retired teacher, and all-around addict. Give it up for Lynn.
Hello. Thank you guys for coming out and supporting Willy. We all know that they are incredible and just a really special person. I have a couple poems. They're really short, so I'm gonna read two. But they really do like kind of focus on this complicated thing of the church, which we've all come in some contact with, probably living here. And it's something that I hope that you guys can have compassion for everyone in every stage that they're at. I'm gonna read these some trauma warnings or abuse. So this one's titled "I Want to Heal." I'm afraid I will never overcome the damage, the programming, or the repetition of a mind molded too young. In fact, I'm still learning how to use language and not be caged in by toxic religion. I was taught forgive, 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 but I'm living proof that some toxins run so deep, so long, and yes, I believe we are not the worst things that have ever been done to us, but that doesn't mean I'm still not learning how to hold on to a good love, how to receive a kiss so true, so full, so pure, that my abuser will recoil at the words I release, but I don't need to reread Christ's stories to know that we become redeemed at the altar of our own peace, to know our own poetry. God, I want to be whole again. Thank you. And then this one's kind of a self-titled to myself. It's called Dear Lynn. There will be so few times in life that you will remember clearly, without blemish or edit or foresight for ending. So yes, take every goddamn photograph and write every poem as if it is Saeed's prelude to Bruise, as if the news has your face on it. Brown girl wins the hearts of every broken boy, as if to say it is not your fault. It is not your fault. You may be tempted to believe it is the condition of a messed up world, but remember what Jericho Brown said. When we look at myth this way, nobody ever bothers saying rape. And I don't think I can take another glamorized story of predatory hero, church led astray, foreskin for taking, Ganymede and Persephone as praise and not mourning. Lynn, you were just a kid, trying to be beautiful, trying to please the gods. You are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are worth it, worthy to see healthy love without the upper hand, worth the demand of dignity and respect. Rest now.
And speaking about healing, that's a huge part of what the effort of this book is. One of the biggest failings of like personal failings with this book is my mom's a really happy person. She just lives it up. And a huge part of why the book is shaped the way it is because these are usually stories that, especially within Central American communities, don't get shared out. The fact that even by age 30, like I have enough knowledge of this stuff that I can write a book out of it is extremely unique within like Central American communities. Most of the time, like there's a solid chunk that's like, yeah, when people are kids, you just don't want to open up war stories about that. That's like a hard thing to figure out how to do. But oftentimes there's just a silence that never gets broached, and part of it is because the kids are too afraid to ask those questions and like potentially open up wounds. And one of the blessings of like writing this book is that it kind of gave me permission to ask my mom and ask my dad, like, hey, what happened? And one of the beautiful things that happened through that process is that, like, as Dios and Diaz have heard that, like, oh, there's a book in the works, they'd, like, just show up at family parties and be like, you're working on a book, right? Sit right here. And then they'd just, like, this story. And they'd be like, I know you're working on a book on your mom's life, but I'm just saying I got, like, 3 books in me that and part of what that is that, like, Central American folks want to see their stories out there. There's a huge challenge in the community with being like, do we have permission to write our parents' stories and all the complicated parts of that? For me, it's that without this book existing, without like all of us as a community speaking out, our stories don't get shared and they get reduced to numbers and they get reduced to political like rhetoric and things like that. So a huge part of the healing here is like, one, being able to tell the story from my filter, through my perspective, just because that was inevitable. But two, so that they can exist afterwards. Like, one of our worst fears is that, like, down the road we like end up with like a little Trump grandchild who like just doesn't know the history of like what it meant for our family to even end up in the U.S. In the note of healing, there's two poems called Setsi Patli to her son, which were just like me trying to heal myself as I was like working through this whole collection. So I'll read one of those, and then we'll have a poem by Sarah, and then I'll do one last piece about my mother migrating here. And then we'll kind of, hug and do the thing. So this one's called Setsi Patli to her son. Mijo, do not mourn your loss of blood. If your blood is thin, it is because we survived armies who took our bodies, but could not take you. Our dream, our wicked little secret. Their wars may have raised us, but its murderers did not. If history is made for kings and myth for gods, forget your history. We learn to speak in Nahuatl, in Espanol, in English. Our tongues, our histories have never been ours. All we ever had is myth. Forget my name. You could not pronounce it anyway. We cannot tell you which way to go, only to go. If you are lost right now, you are home. Give up on nostalgia. The places we loved no longer exist. Keep searching for your mother. You will never find her, but you will find something else. You cannot give. Sarah May is a beautiful Salvadoran visual artist, a poet in their own right, and a huge leading force in Plumas Colectiva, and is also a huge part of leading some of the artivism that is happening for the Great Salt Lake right now, alongside river writing collectives and making waves. Please give it up for Sarah.
I'm the tallest member, which is
We are short people. If you need it taller, it's this one.
Okay, there's one. Thank you. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, it's such an honor to be here. Like Willy said, I'm also Salvi, and my mom came from El Salvador in 1981 to the United States, and Willy was one of my very first Salvi friends that I had. That I don't know, it's been, our relationship's been very healing and very beautiful, and I just feel so grateful and honored to be here. And also, thank you for inviting our story and our history. And I have a collection of poetry about the conversation of Great Salt Lake, and this is one of the last poems in that collection. You tell me to let you come to me as I cry and scream to be seen. Your waters rise in the spring, avocets walk in your shallows, flying across the winding curves of your shoreline, calling and singing for each other, dancing in the air, filled with the tangible joy of being. Your skin hangs loose on your fragile skeleton. I see how the melting ice breathes life into your waters, all the life forms waiting for your emergence. A white spider walks on your exposed shell, looking for a home in the caves you leave in your wake. You tell me the most powerful strength I can develop is to wait, a prayer, a witness of being truly present, hoping for the waves to reach me, to hear the calls of ravens and bulls, welcome me home, for the wind to kiss my skin and grace her fingers along my silhouette, watching the light gather, and your warm embrace, ripples disappearing into your sand, kissing my toes. Waiting is trust. We both arrive at just the right moment for the day to begin. I see myself standing in the middle of your waters, walking barefoot on smooth glass, allowing myself to sink and then float. My soul collapses within myself, merging with my shadows, grieving the pain of the feminine, of not knowing the gentleness of the masculine. My head leans back towards the sky, the wind holds my hair, your water breathes me as I breathe and birth the life I've been carrying around all of these years, letting go of comfort to become something new. My body is giving birth to the sun, my expanding belly holding light at its center. The gentleness of this feminine form stretches to keep my essence safe. My back arching into the curves of the earth, the expanse of the horizon, moonlight my constant companion. We are ready to live in the radiance of the morning sun, amber and orange taking root at my core. Winter is ending. Between death and rebirth, there is a completion. There are truths and worlds within my body that are ready to be awakened into the light. Looking into your reflection is how I learned to see mine. You held me in your arms and carried me across mountains and forests, fields of poppies and desert wildflowers, until we stood together at the edge of the sea. You gave me your water, salt mixed with ice and rain, and told me to give my pain to you. Give my aches and tears to your water in the west. Let your waves hold me to create new memory, drawing out the movement flowing out of me. Your sister called to us across a great distance to return to the place I was born, where my mother brought me into this world, to the land and the sea that carried and held me. Together we drew our first breath. I have been living in your winter, but you are welcoming the spring. Your waves ebb and flow while I sit with you, crying at your shore. You collected my tears, adding them to your waves. You welcomed the rain and snow from your three rivers and let them take care of you. You laughed at me as I pulled myself out of your sinking sand, tossed your hair and teased at my surprise, calling the sunrise as I was staring at the moon, counting the stars when you were conjuring the sun. All this time, you were quietly fighting. You are gaining strength. You show me the way to find mine again.
One more poem, then we'll hang out.
Yeah.
So this is a migration poem. It ends really in your face, but it depends on the audience. And we have a very mixed audience, so like we'll just see how it ends. At the border, the coyote forced Mama to run with the men as punishment for refusing to be raped alongside the other women. I do not know how to describe the way the sand bit into the soles of her feet, into further and further until it became her skin, her flesh. I do not know how to describe the way each step felt like it was underwater when there was no water. When sweat became dry beads of salt, of sand stumbling down her face until they became her face mama, a sand woman. Her throat hissing like wind and snakes, her thighs rubbed together so hard they bled, a dry red, stones sharp as crescents cutting her feet. Then came the hills. In this poem, we will end the story here, where Mama finally rests, where her hands have fallen, already buried wrist deep in the desert. In this poem, everything Mama carried finally falls off her back. The 8 hungry heads of her hermanas y hermanos roll down the hills. The hungrier machetes of the soldiers stick from the ground like needles of giant cacti, her torn shirt exposing the pale brown ripple of her spine finally uncurling. I want there to be a version of the story where she no longer suffers, where for once another God performs the miracle, the atonement of blood and limb, where we no longer have to live with the guilt of her sacrifice. In this poem, a man lifts Mama onto his shoulders and carries her the rest of the way. This man is the same man who stood up when the coyote wanted to put mama with a woman and told him no. She is my sister. We will not part. When the coyote yells for him to leave mama behind to dissolve in dust, this man carries her the way the sky carries the moon. The light we see by in the dark, the only pure thing in the sky. In this poem, this man is my father, sitting beside her hospital bed, massaging her back. No, in this poem, my father is in the hospital bed, howling to the heavens as the doctors pull me bloody from his body, both our feet flailing in descent. This man is each of her unborn children, closing her eyes, nursing her dry lips with our bone and blood. This man is you, right now, listeners. Sitting in your seat, carrying this unholy burden for the shortest moments. So for once, you couldn't understand how quickly you would collapse.